the second session of the morning under the Designing Assessment stream here at the CDE's Supporting Student Success Digital Assessment Practice webinar today. And we have two speakers. Mark, could you start the recording? We have two speakers. Firstly, Professor Alan Parkinson, who is Professor of Financial Education at UCL. And Alan Parkinson will be speaking about criterion-based marking schemes in particular. And our second speaker is Dr. Yaping Gao, who is Senior Academic Director at Quality Matters in the USA. And I'm sure Yaping will explain what that organization does. She will be speaking about alignment matters, rethinking assessment. So I hope colleagues heard me introduce Professor Alan Parkinson and Dr. Yaping Gao. They're both going to speak for around 25 minutes, and then we'll have a question and answer to follow that. So can I hand over without further ado, hoping that Mark has been able to start the recording, to Professor Alan Parkinson. Oh, one final word, and colleagues, please put their questions and chat in the meeting chat, the conversation icon at the top right-hand corner of the session of the screen. So Alan Parkinson, over to you.
Okay, thank you very much indeed, Alan. Good morning, everybody. I'm going to share something now from if I can find it, and I thought I'd put that in there because colleagues who may have seen the blurb had my my other face on it, which, as we're approaching Halloween, I didn't want to scare you too much, but there is something behind that. A baby photo, believe it or not, compared to what I look like now, I was almost okay once, but it's the idea of actually continually learning. I've been around for a long time now. I hope I'm around for a long time longer still, but I think it's incumbent upon us all in our profession of education to learn, to continue to learn, and that's what this is all about. We've got the official title there, which you've all read and Alan announced. Allow me to perhaps give you an alternative title, and it's about being professional. Should we all be wanting to be and learning how to be more professional in our approach to engaging and managing with the assessment process? And I've got, it's not formal research. I've done no surveys myself yet. As a line manager in UCL School of Management, in the Accounting and Finance and Economics team, amongst other things I do, talking to people about assessment and feedback is something which always comes up in the appraisals, but of course more frequently in individual conversations. So here are some random thoughts, but they do have a structure and a framework somewhere in there. And at the end, I'd just like to put it to you, is this valid? Is it a load of nonsense? Should we be doing more about it? If so, what should we be doing? How can we actually become better, more professional at these sorts of things? So again, with experience surveys and literature, let's start with some stories from experience, or should we rather call them tales from the crypt, the horror stories that there are. And we've all got those. We've all been in, whether it's online or face-to-face, students, disputes over marks and grades, which can be interminable. Those conversations, those emails can go on forever. Then there's the requests for more feedback. And in my own experience, anecdotally, it's is it this they want better feedback, or they just want more feedback, or do they want feedback which tells them things that they want to hear, not necessarily how to do better, but tell me that I've done really well in this, that, and the other. Quick turnaround times. I've put there's the American spelling there, fortnight. Well, not American, an abbreviated spelling, fortnight. And certainly at UCL School of Management with UCL, we have a 4-week maximum period. We invariably turn it around in that, but we set our own internal target of 2 weeks. Now, if you think about having, for example, zillions of students, as I've put it there, what about if in a face-to-face situation you've got a module with, say, 400 students on? How do you aspire to and then attain that? Let's see if we can get it all back with meaningful feedback and appropriate marking criteria, if it's there in the first place, being applied in the right way. And then, of course, with open and distance learning, one of my colleagues who's on here at the moment, Lindsay Chu, is Programme Director for MSc Professional Accountancy, which UCL is the academic direction for University of London, aimed at qualified accountants. I'm the Deputy Director on that, and there just seem to be sort of hundreds and thousands of students floating around, and we have these issues here, whether it's face-to-face or online. And then there's this. How about this one? None of us, of course, have ever been here. I forgot the coursework stroke exam needs to be set by Monday, and today is Friday. And there's a mad rush over the weekend. Now, none of us have actually been in this position. It's always somebody else. And what do we end up with? We end up with something which potentially has been cobbled together at the last minute. You send it to, we have a system in UCL School of Management with an internal assessor. We've all got much better at it, I hasten to add. But I can think back to days at UCL when I first started, and indeed at previous institutions, where it would turn up literally at 11 p.m. and it's supposed to go out to the students at midday the next day, and you're trying to say to somebody, well, look, this needs amending and so on. So there's all that sort of stuff. What does it really do for us? So having a look at the literature, that's some anecdotal experience, but I suspect that some of us may have shared that anecdotal experience. I'm quite taken by Ramsden's. By the way, this prompted me, my thoughts about this prompted me, going back to Lawrence Stenhouse and to Donald Shern and being a reflective practitioner and professional and all this stuff, understanding our curriculum, content and design, including assessment. I'm quite taken by this one from Ramsden. The assessment of students is a serious, of course, and often tragic enterprise. Now, to me, that captures some of the assessment challenges that we face. A necessary evil, you throw it in at the end, and then for some students they just think, not all of them, my own experience is I think some of them are getting better at viewing their learning process in a different way. I mean, we were hearing from Stephen and David before, and they were making some observations about students, but also about staff, how we need to align learning outcomes with our assessment and reflection and synthesis and all that sort of stuff. And I'm quite taken as well by Biggs' backwash effect, when the assessment determines student learning rather than the official curriculum. And I think we've all been there where people want to learn to pass the exam or pass the coursework. And again, I think Stephen and David were making some references to that. And then Biggs takes that further by talking about, well, let's get the assessment right. Learning for the test is bad if the test is bad, but if we get the right assessment and it's comprehensive, it places demands on students, it differentiates. We heard, I think it was Stephen referring in the previous session to what differentiates in UK undergraduate degrees a 2-1 from a 2-2, and we all know that there are accusations about universities in parts of the UK aspiring to grade inflation and actually attaining grade inflation. So we mentioned backwash before, but if we can actually get the right assessment, then backwash can become actually positive. So when I was reading about this sort of stuff in this reflective professional mode, which I hope I aspire to and try to enact at least, it got me thinking about reading further. So I looked at some other stuff, and in the terms of assessment being professional, Holroyd a long time ago, are assessors actually professional? Is there a lack of craft knowledge? We all do an awful lot, whether it's face-to-face or online teaching. We learn stuff about good tips. I think it was, I wrote down, I think Alison Turek was saying 12 tips was coming out or came out yesterday, and there's a whole load of stuff out there. What about assessment? Should we be treating learning about teaching and learning about assessment as a form of scholarship? And again, there's a lot of stuff out. There's just some representative samples there. Now here's another one. I said surveys. I haven't done any surveys myself. If this was a proper presentation in a conference, we'd say it's a working paper, very much a working paper. So here are the 4 questions which are asked in the UK National Student Survey results at undergraduate. You can see criteria used in marking have been clear in advance, marking and assessment have been fair, feedback on my work has been timely, I've received helpful comments on my work. Now, sort of some of you are very familiar with NSS results, but let's look at a snapshot. Actually, the figures were updated only last week on the 14th of October. So with the questions there, now these are for full-time students. The part-time students invariably seem to be slightly higher, but I just looked at the full-time ones here because there are more students, and in fact the response rate I think in England was something in excess of 250,000 students, so that's over 250,000 students, so that must indicate something, the size, I think. And we're thinking, okay, this is great, look, because it's all above 70%. Now if we were doing a master's degree and we got about That's a distinction level. But then if we did some comparison with other things, teaching on my course, learning opportunities, academic support, invariably they're all higher percentages agree, statistics, and often well above 80%. And assessment across the board, assessment and feedback seems to be the poor relation. So the question we ask ourselves, is that just because that's how it is? Or is it, going back to what I said earlier about some of the literature, we're not professional enough. We don't treat it as a scholarship. One of the things I will throw in is some of the Russell Group universities. UCL is one of the Russell Group universities. Russell Group universities in the main do particularly badly on assessment and feedback scores. The one thing I will say, UCL School of Management, we were jogging along. Last year we soared up. We did lots of things trying to work with staff to understand it as a scholarship process, as a craft, as I was saying earlier. Now, don't worry, I'm going to teach you something here in a couple of minutes about marking criteria, which has always been a bugbear of mine. And I've got 3 answers, different answers to the same question, but giving the same answer, a strange thing to say, to show how I think marking criteria, what are we trying to assess? What are we trying to get out of the student? What's in their head? Can they get it out and tell us what they've actually understood? Now here, there's something called net present value. Don't worry about it. If you're thinking about doing a project, invariably an organisation, particularly a commercial organisation, would calculate something called net present value, just to let you know if it's positive as a figure at the end of the calculation. That means that you're exceeding the expectations. Say all your funding comes from shareholders and no banks. If your shareholders want, you can see at the bottom it says cost of capital 10%. If you get an NPV which is positive from a calculation, that means you're not just meeting the expectation, you're exceeding the shareholders' expectations, and they'll want to marry you and have your babies because of what you've done. So investment in new equipment, there's some existing equipment that will be used in the project. The new equipment is going to cost £15. I've kept the numbers simple, but you've got to take the money out of the bank, so you're going to lose interest on that £15. You'll get some cash in from customers. That's brilliant. Cash out, unfortunately, for additional operating expenses. Most organisations, many of you will be in universities, of course, there are overhead recharges to departments. They're not cash transfers, they're paper recharges from the overheads that the institution and the commercial organisations will be paying themselves. And where it says a discount factor, just to let you know, if this project gives money back at the end of year 1, and the expectation was it would change by 10%, 100 goes up to 110. So you'd multiply the cash flow at the end of year 1 by 100, divide by 110, which is 0.909. We're going to bring that future cash flow back to today's value. I won't go into the full NPV calculation. Right, so we've got some core data there. Now, the base NPV calculation is for time 0, before operations begin, and year 1, what the relevant cash flows are. I've got X and I've got Y. Then you'll apply the discount factor. Today's value is today's value. At time 0, it's 1. 10% in a year's time, 0.909. You'll multiply the cash flow by the discount factor, and you'll see in the blue boxes equals X times 1 and equals Y times 0.909. You add those two together and you'll get the NPV. And if it's positive, as I said, that's fabulous. If it's negative, the shareholders will be saying, why are you bothering to do something which doesn't meet our expectations? So what we have to be doing here is saying to the students, right, I think anybody can actually do that calculation. And indeed, for example, on discounting, as it's called, Excel has a spreadsheet function which does it for you automatically. The challenge is to get the right relevant cash flows in there. And I gave you a whole list of items earlier on. So part of the challenge will be for the students to say what's relevant, what's not relevant. So I've done that for you. Don't worry about looking at all the detail, just to know that of all those list of items that I showed you earlier, the ones in pale blue are the ones which are relevant, and therefore they'll go into that calculation I've just showed you, but the other ones are not relevant. The ones not coloured in blue are in the darker shading in the box on your screen, in the boxes on your screen. They're the ones which are not relevant. So what we'll do is we'll take that base calculation I said, there you go, we've got investing equipment at time 0, 15. The interest lost is relevant because it's a cash impact. You no longer have that cash coming in. Oh, you've got some cash coming in from customers. That's fabulous. Oh dear, we have to pay out cash for operating expenses. They are the relevant costs. So we add them up we multiply by the discount factors, and as we can see, you've got an NPV of 20. Now, in a previous session that I ran in UCL School of Management with my finance and accounting and economics colleagues, I showed them a variation on this. I've cut the numbers down a bit, but what's interesting is that with one error, this scored 18 out of 20. So you think, well, that's fine. With one apparent error, they got one of the relevant cost figures wrong. That's super. But let me put it to you, what are we trying to tease out of them? Not only do we want them to stick down the relevant costs, do we want them to demonstrate to us what the non-relevant costs are? You could argue, oh, they haven't put it on the schedule. That means they know what it is, what a non-relevant cost is. Well, not necessarily. I mean, they might have no comprehension of what it is. We're just seeing one representation of what's going on in their mind. So maybe if we had a different set of marking criteria where we said, you actually in your schedule, don't just put down the relevant costs. If it's non-relevant, you have to tell us that it's 0, it's non-relevant, and also explain why it's a non-relevant cost. Now, that starts to, I think, differentiate between the students in terms of their understanding, and we can start to pull apart the students who are distinction level, the ones who are, yeah, they're good, but they're not quite as good, and going down, almost graded grains, if you like. So when I put a marking scheme on which did that, in this one, all of a sudden, where there was the original one apparent error, and there were 3 non-relevant errors which didn't appear in the previous one because they just put down the relevant costs, but they clearly didn't understand other things when we asked them to go further, that 18 became 13. Now that is a marked difference, of course. And then let me be controversial. What about if, here's something, there are some key things in these NPV calculations, for example. If you include depreciation, you deserve to go into the torture chamber. You deserve to be hung, drawn, and quartered. That is an error. Accountants will be throwing but just the heads would go into their hands. And if you include that in the calculation, okay, you won't get the final NPV figure correct. But should we actually be penalising students for putting something in which is so fundamental that it shows that they really don't understand? Similarly with the overhead recharge. Anybody who puts an overhead recharge is on pain of torture again. So question, should we put negative marking in? If you put it in, you actually lose a mark. Now, when we did that as an experiment, what we discovered is that what started off as 18 then dropped down to 13, then dropped down to 10. Now, I'm not suggesting we would use this particular one in the real world, but I think it's that which tries to get into people's minds. What are we trying to tease out of the students in their understanding? And then there's also being able to reward them, and you get that differentiation between the great student, the almost great student, the good student, the not so good student, and so on. We've been doing variations of this for a while, and it seems to have improved we're not getting grade inflation. One of the challenges is students say, well, how do I know what it is? And I'll talk about that a little bit later on. Greater professionalisation got me thinking. I started to look at some stuff by 2 particular writers, Norton and Norton, who've done some work, as you can see, with Shannon and Sadler. Assessment design inventory, ADI, and the attitudes to marking and feedback inventory. And until I started reading around it, I hadn't really come across the AMFI. So let me just give you a brief intro into those. The ADI, the assessment design inventory, there are 2 factors and 19 items shared across them. Factor 1, desirable practice. What would I like to happen in my assessment practice? The example I've given there, I design my assessments to help students take responsibility for own learning progress. But then, of course, we have our desires. This is what we want to happen. What are the constraints? Maybe as this one here, I find it a challenge to design pedagogically sound assessments because of a student focus on grades. And as I read through, I won't put all the others up, of course, so they go on forever, but that prompted me to think about that here is a framework. It may not be perfect, but it prompts you to think about things. And then the approach to marking and feedback inventory, 4 factors with 17 items spread across them, not all the 17 in here. Staff training. I mean, do we actually give our colleagues a chance to practice marking, practice different types of marking schemes? And again, to align those with the learning outcomes, I think is really important. We heard that from Stephen and David in their session, those who were here earlier. Do we train people? Do we give them the opportunity to practice? What about regulatory inhibition? Too much bureaucracy associated with the whole marking feedback system, which is a view that some people have. What about systematic failure? Students not bothering to read the feedback, they're only just interested in the mark, and then they turn up either online or in your office, sitting there for 3 hours arguing over one mark. You gave me 71, which is a first class at undergraduate level. I think it should have been 72, and I've actually had that experience myself. And then marking criteria. And I do this in my own finance and accounting and economics team as well. We've got people who are brand new, who have no idea. They've also, some of them come from an American system. We have people who come from Harvard and Stanford and wonderful places like that. And they've gone through a very different, as they call it, grading process. So there's an education process there. But I've also got very experienced people from different backgrounds who, those 3 examples I gave you, those 3 examples came because when I put it to colleagues, they came up with those. One person was saying, no, it should be like number 1, I showed you example 2. Another person, a bit more experienced, said, no, we've got to take account of that. And the negative one, somebody was really going for the jugular of the students. So I just thought that this in future might be something that I could look at. Again, work in progress for me. I'd be interested in opening it up, not so much, you've heard enough of my voice, but to get some thoughts from you. And then there's the next steps. Who knows your thoughts, but I've grab here on a final diagram. Alignment with the learning outcomes and therefore the content, so that the backwash that I referred to earlier on is actually positive rather than negative. Something I've just illustrated to you, differentiating marking scheme between the great and all the way down to you've got a bit of a problem as a student. There's the student expectations, including turnaround time, with lots of students, whether it's online or face-to-face. How do we give good, meaningful feedback with good marking criteria that have been applied appropriately, so that they understand what's going on? That student understanding of marking criteria, I've got my own way if anybody wants to ask later on. And then how do we get, I think particularly online now, that because you're not going to see them face to face, and you don't want the message system all clogged up, or somebody demanding these days to have a Zoom call with you because they want to get more. If you've got 400, 500 students, that's just so difficult. So how do we design in feedback, good feedback, which is linked to marking criteria with a guideline answer? And I think this applies whether it's face to face or online. So I just thought I'd throw that out there. These are thoughts, random thoughts that have been going through my mind for some time now. I've developed my own systems. We've been doing some training and development sessions within the UCL School of Management. So I don't know, is it a load of rubbish, all this stuff about, we've got to develop scholarship, professionalisation, or should we just say to individuals, no, you get on with it, you've got your students, you know what your subject is? I don't know. I'll shut up. Words my students in lectures are always delighted to hear, and it means we've approached the end. Alan, over to you.
Thank you very much, Alan. A very engaging talk, as always, from you. What I propose to do is to go straight on with our second speaker, Dr. Yaping Gao, and then when she's made her contribution, to take some questions and discussions. At the moment, I don't have access to the chat line. I don't know why. So maybe, Mark, if you're listening, if you're able to pull out 2 or 3 of the most important topics there for me and send them to me in a WhatsApp, that would be helpful. Now, Yaping Gao, are you there and are you ready? If Alan could take if the slides for Alan Parkinson could go down. And Yaping, if you are able to put your own slides up.
Yes, I'm here. Thank you, Dr. Alan, Dr. Linda, for your invitation. And thank you, Dr. Alan Parkinson, for this wonderful presentation on criteria-based assessment. I'm just honored to have this opportunity to represent Quality Matters, or QM, and in US to participate in this webinar. So I will just quickly go through a few slides to introduce QM, but my focus would really be on alignment. My current position in QM is Senior Academic Director, but I focus more on member services and partnerships. Partnerships in particular outside USA. I will hit a few key points. The first one is just quickly introduce QM, and then my focus would really be on how can we apply the principle of alignment at course level. And that's as Dr. Alan Parkinson mentioned, there needs to be alignment between learning objectives and assessments. And also I want to mention the alignment among all course components and engagement support, etc. I will also share some resources from the education community. I'm not seeing myself on the screen, so I understand that that's probably normal, right? Okay. Okay, but that's fine. QM has over 1,350 member institutions all over the world now. We're in 24 countries, and I'm very happy to report that we have 4 member institutions from UK. They are Keele University, Nottingham Trent University, University of Lincoln, and University of Sunderland. So I hope in the near future, we would have University of London be part of the QM community as well. In the quick summary, what QM is and what QM does is that QM is a quality assurance process. Is really, we have 5 sets of research-based standards, Rubric, and we provide a lot of professional development based on your role at your institution. And we also have a peer review process for online courses and programs. And if there's one thing I would like all of you to take away is QM is really very adaptable. That means depends on where you are at the institution, and we can guide you to where you want to go. So just very quickly, this 5 sets of standards. And we started with higher education, but then publisher K-12, and we also have a CPE, continuing education rubric. Each rubric follows a pattern of 8 general standards, and under each general standard, there's more specific standards. So for example, the higher education, we have 42 specific standards, and it's really higher level guidance. It's all the standards are interrelated, and that's based on research and studies. And the principle of alignment is really key, and I will go into a lot of more details in the next few minutes. And you can also use the standards to guide your competence-based education programs. And it is really QM's emphasis is not on technology. We are all for pedagogy, teaching and learning pedagogy. Here's just a very quick view of one standard that comes with all the annotations. So for example, the 2.1 says learning objectives needs to be measurable. Now, what does that mean exactly? So here's a quick screenshot of one set of pathways of our PD workshops and for faculty, staff, and administrators. I mentioned earlier, it's a peer review process. If you have online courses or online programs, so we go through this peer review process. Peer meaning all of the QM certified peer reviews are from the community. They are just like you, faculty, teaching faculty, or doing research in the community, in institutions, and they are specifically QM certified to take on that role to peer review courses and programs from other institutions. These are sets of marks. The first row is the mark to be used if your course meets QM standards, so it's QM certified. And the row under is the mark for your program that has been certified. Okay, so this when Dr. Alan Parkinson was doing his presentation, he was mentioning, some of faculty's questions are, how do I really do pedagogically sound assessments, right? And there need to be alignment. So I thought my session would be hopefully a good continuation of that conversation. Of course, as the saying goes, that, it takes the whole village to raise a child, and certainly in education, it takes the whole institution, the whole university, the whole school to educate one child. So the principle of alignment really matters at the institutional level, program level, and we will focus more on course level. Depend on what role you have at your institution. If you are an top level administrator, of course, your priority would be institutional accreditation, student enrollment, completion rate, culture, governance, etc., etc. If your main role is a dean or the head of program, of course, your major concern would be the program outcomes, competencies, curriculum mapping, assessments, academic rigor, faculty development, etc., etc. Now, I would assume many of you, if not most of you, are teaching faculty, right, at the institution. So your concern is really, how do I teach my students? How do I engage my students? So objectives, assessments, content, engagement, support, etc., etc. These are the very important issue. So everything at the institution at different levels needs to be aligned. Here's just a quick view. In the US, we have this CRAC by the Council of Regional Accrediting Commissions, who has this set of interregional guidelines for assess the quality of online education. So there's 9 standards, and I just put them into one circle just to show you everything that's in the criteria, in the standards that they are looking for needs to serve the institutional goals and the mission. So that's one kind of alignment at the institutional level. At the program level, earlier I shared in the screen that QM does a program review, and there's 4 parts. And the first part is program design, and then teaching support, learner support, and then finally learner success, student success. So everything you put into your program, program design, curriculum mapping, and then you need to provide support for your faculty before, during, and after teaching, right? And certainly, you need to provide all kinds of support services for your students. But what is the outcome? What are you really doing all this input for? Is for students. So everything, if you consider at the program level, input, output, that's how you want to think about alignment. So what is alignment at the course level? If you are faculty, you say, well, yeah, these are all good, big stuff, but I'm teaching my students on a daily basis. What can I do, right? So here the screen shows a quote from Jim Wilkinson, and that is a quick definition by Ralph Tyler, the pretty well-known US based educator. Basically, if you are serving, or if you have any background in instructional design, it's really saying that you need to have your learning objectives or learning outcomes first. You need to know where you want your students to go, and then you go back and say, okay, this is how I'm going to assess my students because of those goals, those outcomes. And then everything else in between everything else you put into your course is to support the students to achieve those learning outcomes. So in the language of instructional design, they call it the backward design. Personally, I have been an instructional designer for the past 25 years. I start from there. And I would like to actually call it a forward design, because the objectives are the goals, right? And then you look to see how you can help your students to achieve that goal. So I would like to remind all of our colleagues here today, if you are a teaching faculty, or if you used to teach, or if you are going to teach in the future, when we have the opportunity, think about at the course level what you can do, okay? Think about alignment between objectives and assessments. Think about the alignment among all the components, course components. Anything that you build, you use, or you put into your course needs to have a purpose. And then you want to build your learning activities, your interactions, etc., and including the supporting services. So the whole online environment is really a user-friendly, a learner-centered environment that can help students succeed. So I will go a little bit more in detail for each of those. So before I go into those alignment thing, let's just, I'm sharing with you a screen, kind of look pretty complicated, but do not worry, that is not my topic. So when the pandemic started a few months ago, and every faculty, face-to-face faculty needs to go transition into remote teaching overnight, whether we like it or not, we had to do it. One of the biggest concern, or one of the first question that the traditional faculty would ask, how am I going to do assessments? How am I going to give my final exam? That is their biggest concern, and it's rightfully so. Yeah. And I understand that your institution has done a fabulous job transition and help your students all over the world, to do their exams. So I want to commend all of you for this great effort. So the screen here shows is actually a recent research done by Angel Ventures, that is a US-based research firm. Their survey, they have identified 22 different products that they called assessments integrity solutions. And their analysis found that in the US, there are 1,300 US higher education institutions are using 2,400 of those implementations, meaning different environment, different tools, different softwares, and different hardwares, and before, during, and after tests. So that's how complicated the technological environment is if you really want to ensure academic integrity by securing the testing environment. Okay, so that's just give you a little taste of the landscape of the technological environment for ensuring the integrity of assessment and academic quality. And this is beyond the reach of any individual faculty, of course. So I will not go deep into this, but what can we do as individual faculty? So let's go back to assessment. align objectives with assessment. And you all probably are very comfortable with this taxonomy, right? When we are talking about the theory of teaching and learning, we always say, cognitive skills, there's a low level, and then you go to the mid level, and then you want students hopefully achieve a high level cognitive skills. And there is a misconception I commonly heard is that, they say, well, my course is, it's very basic. It's 101. Yeah, it is a 101 survey course. It's a basic course. It's a general education course. But that does not mean, your final exam should be all like choice, A, B, C, D, like just multiple choice questions. It should not. In each and every course, you should be able to find some ways to help students go from the low cognitive skills to understanding, to apply, and hopefully to more higher cognitive skills. This is there's so much research done by the community over the past few decades, so there's no it's simply not possible for me to try to represent everything, but this is a good example of alignment that any faculty can take a look, and if anything makes sense to you, then you can use it. So if you are teaching a very basic course, in economy, etc., you say, well, I have certain terminologies I want my students to know, understand. Of course, you start with the low level, right? That's where they should be understanding or trying to remember some definitions. So your goal is for students to, so the low in the stairs, up the stairs, the low under the stairs are the action verbs that can be used in your course to define the learning objectives or the learning outcomes that you want. And then those terms on top of the stairs are the learning activities or even assessments that you can build in order to achieve those learning objectives. Okay, so if you want students to define something, you want to give them some examples or some visuals, and then they can tell you what that is. And if you want them to survey something, you probably wanted to have some, design a problem or do a test, things like that. So it's very visually, I would say, but also it makes a lot of sense to build your learning objectives from lower level to higher level. And this is all the resources are available. And if any of the colleagues here today want it, just send me an email at the end of this conversation, and I will share all of the resources. This is another example from the community by Dustin Sameh at University of Kansas. I think he has a very strong instructional design background. So what he did was that he still used the same taxonomy from the low cognitive skills to all the way up evaluating and creating. And then he has gave some good examples of a formative assessment that can go with each level, as well as summative assessments. So one of the things that, in addition to assessment, faculty are also concerned about teaching remotely or teaching online is the hands-on practice. How do you do labs, and then how do things like that that in the face-to-face teaching you typically students have to come on campus and come to labs, etc. So this is also a good reference, and hopefully it will give you some new ideas, some new inspirations to try things. So again, I will send you the resources, the links, if you like it, and if you can email me towards the end of this. Okay, so that's assessments. And then, as I mentioned earlier, the second part that we can really apply the principle of alignment is different components. So on the screen is the 8 general standards for the QM higher education rubric for course design. And other than the first one is of course, because it's a standards, that means we assume the course has already been built. So the standards will open up saying, how are you introducing the course to the students? But the main body of the course, the most important parts or components of the course is your learning objectives, is your assessment, is your course content, instructional material, is your learning activities and interaction, and is your technology. These pieces need to be aligned. That means everything that you add into the course content, course materials, your PowerPoint, the chapter summary, case study, examples, YouTube videos, everything that you add to the course needs to be mapped out so students understand, I'm reading this, I'm doing this because of this objective. So it needs to be a course mapping. A map from objectives to assessments and to what you want them to read, review, do, and then what kind of technology they need to use or that they need to apply in order to do all of this. So these standards need to be well aligned, and then you need to provide student support if they need the technical support or some kind of library, resources or registration, etc., etc. And in the US, at least, accessibility for students is crucial. It's actually a federal mandate. It's a federal requirement that says if you are offering online course or online programs, everything students need to be accessible, need to be available to students online. You cannot require an online students to come to campus to do anything. Okay, so so once the course is built, the content is there, the assessments is there. That's still not enough. Interaction and engagement in the online environment do not come automatically. You really need to build those interaction, build the opportunity for students to engage in the course, in each activity, even in assessments, and all sorts of student supports that your students will needs to be inside the course or in the student portal that they go to. When we're talking about interaction in the online course, we are talking about students interact with the course material, certainly, right? That's that is a given. That means, if you're teaching face-to-face, you always give your, say the textbook, the learning materials, they need to read this, they need to review this, or they need to provide their feedback on this. So interaction between students and the content is typically not a major concern. The second layer of interaction is between students and the faculty, students and the instructor. And I remember Dr. Ellen Parkinson was saying, students are asking for proper feedbacks, and certain times they want the, but other times getting. So interaction between the students and the instructors, you want at the very beginning, you want to specify, you want to very clearly state what are the expectations that students have from you, about you. So what kind of assignment activities will have, feedback right away, because maybe there are quizzes and the LMS can, mark them or grade them automatically. Or if there's small essays and if there's big papers, you wanted to make sure that students understand how soon or how often they can get feedback from you. So from the very beginning, make that very clear. And then the third layer of interaction, that would depend on the nature and how big, how large enrollment the course is. That is the interaction between students. Students interact with students. And of course, we all know if you are teaching undergraduate, a big class with 200 students, it's kind of a little harder to do that, but you can still put them into smaller groups and they can still interact, right? And then if you're teaching a graduate or even doctoral students, it's probably easier because they have lots of experience to share, and they are the size of the courses are, smaller. So students to students interaction, it's depends on the nature and the size of the course. So back to the QM standards, there are quite a few very specific standards in the higher education rubric by QM that really promotes and encourage interaction and engagements. So here are just a few of them. They do touch upon the learning activities, and they need to support learning objectives and support active learning. And it talks about assessments, needs to be sequenced, varied, and suited to the level of the course. And you need to be able to provide the students with different kind of opportunity for timely feedback. Students should be able to track their own learning progress, and of course the tools that you're using in the course needs to serve the purpose of engaging students. And we also talked about student support. So again, in the QM higher education standards, we have 7 standards that focus on what kind of student support. Either it's academic part, or either they are, registration, some other services that students need. So, and including technical support, of course. So, I'm sharing a few resources, and these are all links, and I will not, just because of the time, I will not go into each of the links. But if you're interested, I will send a link to you by email. And the first one is there's a lot of research done, webinar, conference presentation, etc., by the QM community and beyond, and that specifically focused on alignment and how to align objectives with assessments, and how to do authentic assessments, active learning. And then the second and the third is really due to the pandemic, the community, the international community, and not just US, asking us, in the past, we only need to support my online faculty. I only need to be responsible for my online courses, but now everybody is teaching online, quote unquote online. So in March, we put together a checklist for remote emergency remote instruction. And the reason we call that is it is emergency remote instruction because everybody was forced to teach remotely overnight. So, but this checklist is not the same as the QM quality standards. And then a few months passed, and over the summer, the community comes back and they say, you know, now we have done a few months of this emergency teaching, but the quality is not good. You know, the students are not very happy, and the faculty are like, you know, really, really frustrated because the faculty trying to do everything in the online environment as if they were teaching face-to-face. So they were Zoom day in and a day out. And this is not really quality online education. So we come up with a guide that trying to connect from the checklist, from the emergency remote instruction mood to basic quality course design. So these are two sets of tools that is open to everybody, that is free to the community, and I'm happy to share. And last but not least, I'm sharing on the screen just the 23 essential standards for the higher education rubric out of the 42. These 23 are what QM calls the essential standards. That means we feel they are absolutely necessary for online education, online courses. Over the past 4 or 5 years, because of my job, my role, I have had many opportunities to interact and to work with different international communities. So I would do quick surveys and informal studies, and the standards like 1.1, 1.2, everything that's highlighted here. These so 23 and these highlighted standards are considered by every single international communities outside the US. They consider these as absolutely necessary. And that is in the context of different culture, different language, different pedagogy practice, and even different technological environment. Infrastructure. It doesn't matter. So that speaks to me, really when we talk about teaching and learning in the online environment or face-to-face, because if you look at the standards here, not many of them, maybe one or two, even mention the word online. It doesn't matter. The online environment is your mood of delivery. But what you are teaching, the learning objectives, that does not change, right? A course can be taught face-to-face. A course can be taught online. A course can be taught hybrid. It doesn't matter. Your learning objectives do not change. So the core elements of teaching and the learning remain the same, no matter where you are, what language you speak, what pedagogy you have. So I just want to share. Okay, so in closing, let me just remind all of us again, you are teaching faculty, you're always busy, you're the ones that's in the trench, you're teaching our students, you're the most important component in this whole learning journey for our students. But when you have a moment, have the opportunity to rethinking or maybe trying to improve your course, think about the alignment between objectives and assessments. Where your course components are aligned. Do they support each other? I'm using this tool. Do I have a specific purpose? And also how you're engaging students in the online environment. Once the course is well designed, students' engagement and your teaching presence are the most important elements here. So with that, I want to thank you everybody for your time, and email me or you can Skype me, yaping.qm, that's my Skype ID, my first name .qm, or ygao@qualitymatters.org. So, Alan, back to you.
Thank you very much indeed, Yaping.
Sure.
A fascinating overview of your approaches at Quality Matters. So we have now some 15 minutes before we move to our final plenary meeting. And I've had some questions in the chat. First of all, I've got a couple for Alan Parkinson, and then we'll just give Yaping a chance to rest a little bit, and then we'll come back to Yaping in a second. So Alan, I've had a question from David, who comments that marking schemes have assessment criteria, but do they also have learning outcomes in your view?
In my view, whether I'm right or wrong, I think they should have, and indeed, again, the particular personal experience I've got at the moment, in UCL, there is a requirement that, for example, on a coursework sheet, that we let the students know, say there are 4 or 5 learning outcomes for a module, we have to specify which specific learning outcomes are being, I won't say tested, let's say attended to within the particular piece of coursework brief that we're just about to publish. And I think if you, with what we've just heard from our colleague about alignment, I think that's important because of that. And also, Stephen, David, going back to your presentation, I'm just looking at my notes here, you know, where you were saying that exams and assessment should be aligned with learning outcomes. Now, if you're going to have assessment criteria, the point I was trying to get across, possibly failed miserably in my presentation with the marking criteria, is with those non-relevant items, you know, everybody includes the relevant if they know what they're doing. It's really important that they understand what doesn't get included, why it's included, and that's part of the learning about that particular area. So I think A, it does fit in with the learning outcomes there on that particular topic, but also B, we should be having marking criteria which link to that. So I think it is. It's interrelated. You know, you could see the pipe. You could see the all the circles over the Venn diagrams. Everything overlapping. Okay,
so alignment looks as if it's going to be the word of the morning, linking everything together. We had a question from Pip also, Alan, for you. How do you inform students about marking criteria and how are they applied?
Okay, so first of all, let me go back to a face-to-face experience. And with the face-to-face experience, it happens to be in one of the modules in which that particular topic I was referring to in the marking example is covered. We get the students to do presentations, and then we get the other students, before we get into the rest of the seminar, we give the answers to the students, the other students, while they're presenting. They have to do their own as well, their own answers, the other students, and we get them to tell the students where they've got, the students presenting, where they've gone right, where they've gone wrong. But we also have the marking criteria for each of those points in the answer clearly specified. So you can imagine after they've done this for 8, 9, 10 weeks on various topics, what they're seeing is that it's not just a matter, it's marked out of 20, oh, you got one item wrong, so you're going to get 19 out of 20. It depends on how important that item is within the learning which needs to take place to fully understand the breadth and depth of the topic. After about 3 weeks, they all seem to cotton onto that. And once we started doing that, we did notice an improvement in that people were being more insightful. They were synthesizing better, they were reflecting more within their presentations, and also that came through in the coursework and indeed some of the exam questions, because as a by the by, accounting and finance course isn't just about numbers, there's a whole qualitative dimension. I think if it's the Pip that I know, I think Pip, you share the sad title with me of being a qualified accountant. But, you know, hey, somebody has to be, so we're the two qualified accountants here today, maybe.
Well, I thought I might have ended up being a qualified accountant, Alan, because you took us into quite a lot of accountancy concepts in one part of your talk. So I'm looking for some higher education credit here.
There are some worse things to be, Alan, because of course in times of prosperity and boom we need accountants, and unfortunately if there's times when things aren't so good, recessions, we need accountants.
Okay, very good. Yaping, can I come back to you? Alignment was the term that you majored on, really, and I'm interested in the idea of how a range of different sets of skills get aligned. For example, mainstream teaching in higher education and the professional knowledge of instructional designers. they're not necessarily the same, are they? Or at least they're not always aligned. How do you bring instructional design into being more aligned, or vice versa? How do we get our mainstream higher education teachers more aligned with the professional knowledge of instructional design?
Well, that's, it's education process, really, because most of the faculty, I mean, at least in the US, and I think it's the same internationally as well, most of the faculty, they serve as teaching faculty is because of their academic discipline, because they have doctorate in physics, a doctorate in accounting, a doctorate in business, whatever. So they have a passion for teaching, but they are not necessarily trained as an educator. Okay, they learn as they start, right? So they can become a professor at 27 years old because of their academic background, but not because of teaching background. So a lot of time, 20 years ago, when I started as an instructional designer, my faculty did not really know what I do. So the word goes out to say, oh, there's this Chinese lady, who can help us make pretty icons. So I can use that pretty icon into my online courses, and that makes them happy. So I took that opportunity, actually. I did make pretty icons for them, for those who wanted. And then they come to my office, and then I start to say, well, let's take a look at your course, what kind of assessment you are doing, etc. Faculty learn from colleagues, and the faculty actually teaching themselves, or teaching their students. They learn the pedagogy along the way, and what works and what does not work. And if we can get some lead or champion faculty to really look at assessments, look at the alignment, look at learning objectives, and then have them showcase or have them talk to their colleagues. And then that's probably more efficient than one instructional or two instructional designers trying to provide trainings, etc. So I think there is a way, and faculty teach. This is like the whole all of the world. Faculty teach not for the money. Faculty teachers are always undercompensated. We teach because it's a calling, and it's because we want to help our students. And if a faculty can understand, can see other faculty are doing certain things that save their time and also help students to learn, they will do it. They will try it. So, and this is a great opportunity. In a sense, the pandemic is kind of like an equalizer. It's like put everybody on the same page and see where we go from here. You either take the opportunity to get inspired, to learn new things, or you either say, well, this is not good, but the world is going to move forward. Okay, so even after the pandemic, even after we return to a new normal, the skills, the technologies that faculty are learning, are using right now is still going to continue, because the students will continue to ask for them. So.
Okay, thank you.
Alan, I think his screen is frozen again.
Yeah.
Right? Okay.
Yeah, we got to Frozen 4.
Frozen 4.
Frozen 4.
Come back, Alan.
Okay, I did actually. I'll while we see if Alan gets back in, I did actually put a question in the chat, which I asked Alan. If there you are, Alan. You got to Frozen 4.
I got thrown out, so I've managed to fight my way back in. I don't know where you were going with your bit of the conversation. I was going to kind of return the topic to you, Alan, because you talk quite a lot about professional practice and professional culture in managing assessment. So I wondered if you had ideas about how to embed and to enculture this professionalism in assessment issues.
That's, yeah. Discussing 5,000 words, I think, is what we'd set that as an assignment, wouldn't we? Put that question, discussing 5,000 words. There's all that stuff, which is my get out clause. It's multifaceted, it's nuanced, and so on. How we do it? The answer is I don't know. From personal experience, we gather people together in small groups. One of the things we do in our particular School of Management is each year we have a teaching and learning forum with a range of particular foci areas, and one of those is invariably assessment and feedback. We get people to talk about their experiences. Actually, it's quite interesting. One of the sessions I ran last year, the year before, about what their challenges and fears were. That was quite interesting. And in a small group, we were doing it in small groups where people know each other anyway within the school. It was quite interesting that people were quite open about some of their fears. Some of it was to do with, in some respects, some of them were fearful of students. We've all been in the situation where we have what we might refer to as assertive students. Some might actually go further and say aggressive students. Again, go back to you gave me 71, I demand a mark of 72, you know, and you get that. I think people are fearful of that. But going back to how we do the professionalization, I think it is developing scholarship, giving people opportunity to try things out, getting peer review. I mentioned that we have a system of internal assessors. So the module leader is the internal examiner setting the assessments, but we have that pair of eyes and ears to review things. Now, that's interesting. People are busy. How do we get people to really buy into, you can't get something at 5 p.m. and give it back at 5:30 p.m. saying, yeah, everything's fabulous. Question. Get the question. Should you be looking at the answer? Should you be working through the answer? Should you be working through the marking criteria? So I think it's double-edged in that sense. It's getting the actual module leaders as internal examiners to buy into how do we make better assessments, good marking criteria which differentiate, but then also getting the internal assessors to be better reviewers and to have those open conversations. Nobody's pointing the finger at anybody, but to make it a shared partnership. I think we've tried to do some of that, and I think we've had some success there, but I don't think it's widespread. Certainly where I have been, I'm not at the moment, but where I've been in institutions, I found a wide variety of practice. I mean, I still see, certainly not the last one, the one I was at, I saw closed questions, you know, questions like, is it possible to apply, I think there was one, is it possible to apply the capital asset pricing model? There's something else you can learn about, Alan, as chair. Is it possible to apply the capital asset pricing model to any commercial company with shareholders? Now, that question should have been written in a different way anyway, but you could write yes, or you could write no, and you've answered the question. Is it possible to apply the capital asset pricing model? Somebody writes yes, they've answered the question, or no. So I think there's the whole art about writing the questions as well, even qualitative ones.
Alan, I'm gonna have to ask you to bring that to a close, I'm afraid, because we need to go into the final plenary session.
I'll shut up.
So just let me thank Dr. Yaping Gao from Quality Matters and Professor Alan Parkinson from UCL once again for this fascinating session on designing assessment. I think that lies at the heart of the whole issue. The link for the plenary session should be with you. So you need to come out of this session and then find the link for the plenary session. I think it's in the chat, and join our final 15 minutes of today's discussion of digital assessment practice. So thanks again, Yaping and Alan.